G'day and welcome to another episode of SPCs Unleashed. I'm Mark Richards. I'm joined by my friends from Europe, Ali Hajju, Nico Constantas and Stefan Neck. And today we are going to crack open the new Safe for Hardware course. Well, that's probably our excuse for a discussion about hardware. And Ali never needs an excuse for a discussion about hardware, and so it's very fitting that I hand the reins over to him. Over to you, mate.
Thank you. No, indeed, it's this is probably my favorite topic. It's what I do, and it's also a beautiful source of controversy. So it always generates nice discussions. Because quite recently, Safe came out with a Safe for Hardware training. In the past, there was a Safe for Hardware workshop. Did you remember that? It's sort of a downloadable toolkit, and it contains some slides and some activities. And with more and more companies, also in manufacturing, development, and engineering, searching for better ways of working, it just made sense to make a training out of it. So today we're going to talk a little bit about the Safe for Hardware training material, but I think more specifically we're going to zoom in into just agility or agile in hardware, because the Agile Manifesto has been existing for more than 24 years right now. So it's just the standard in software development. People they join the workforce from university, knowing Scrum or knowing these types of methods. It's standard. However, the agile way of working is being used in way more environments than just the software industry. So we're going to deep dive a little bit about what that means whenever you have mechanical engineers, electrical engineers, optics, mechatronica, industrialization. And that's where this training also comes into part. The thing is, I think, Stefan, it was you who mentioned in the preparation something about, wait a second, I went back to the new product development game, which is a document or a report or article presented in, I think it was 86 or so, by Professor Takeuchi Nonaka. And all of the examples in there are from companies like Fujitsu, 3M, Canon, Honda. All of these companies create physical products. So the basis of what we call Scrum, most well-known agile method or agile framework, comes from hardware companies. So in this show, we're going to figure out that actually there's quite a lot of similarities in the way of working with respect to agile for software versus agile for hardware. There's just a lot of similarities, and if we start there, we'll see that we could actually use quite a lot of our learnings. Mark, I see that you want to talk. I saw it.
You've just sparked something for me, right? And I was just curious, right? There was a book, and it was called The Knowledge Creating Company, and it was written by the two professors who published the new product, the new, right? And this whole book in The Knowledge Creating Company talked about extrinsic learning and intrinsic learning, and intrinsic learning being something you could only acquire by doing, and extrinsic learning being something that you could pass on. And they would talk about tacit as well. And they gave these examples, and the one I've never forgotten is the example of the competition to see who could produce the first bread making machine. And it was like all the consumer electronics companies were trying to be the ones who could crack the code to make an automatic bread maker that actually you wanted to eat the bread from. And the one that made the breakthrough, they sent one of their senior engineers off to do an apprenticeship with a bakery. And it's like senior engineer, full-on apprenticeship, months with one of the commercial bakeries, learning how to make bread with his hands, and then came back and cracked the code of making the bread maker. And they had this beautiful set of insights around the way we learn and the way in which innovation happens. And I hadn't thought of it for a very long time. I loved it when I read it back in my early Scrum days. But thank you for the flashback. Sorry. Did any of you guys read that book?
No,
Nope.
No, I didn't.
It's a fantastic read.
Well, what just
Nice.
Ali mentioned, the new product development game, like almost 40 years ago, right? It created some flashbacks for me. And I thought, what have we done in the software industry the last 30, 40 years based on such a basic paper? And honestly, we're part of that industry as well, right? To deep dive now and say, okay, there were some principles out there for the last 3 to 4 decades, and did we really use them? And honestly, my answer for me, myself, and what I've done the last 30 years, probably I only scratched on the surface. And that's where the passion is to kind of listen and discuss it today with you guys.
But it creates a really
Gonna be-
interesting, if you think about the conundrum, you know, when I think 80% of the people in the world mention the word agile, they're talking about something that smells like Scrum. And Scrum was absolutely fully based on that paper they wrote back in the late 80s. So the entirety of what the popular world thinks of as agile was inherited from hardware, and now we're trying to export agile back to hardware.
Yes.
Like if you know, Scrum was what happened when we took hardware thinking about how to do better hardware product development and applied it to software. What's going on when we try and export that back to hardware?
And we're
You
going
explain
to do
very well
exactly that.
how I'm feeling, by the way, Mark. I'm feeling like sitting between chairs somehow. The last days, I did a lot of research in hardware, talk with people in hardware because of the class I gave the last days. And it felt somehow like, hey, wow, that's the roots, the origin. You have to honor them, understand them more, etc. On the other side, I got so many lame excuses like, oh, this doesn't work in hardware. You're a softie. You cannot understand that.
Yeah.
And by the way, it's the same thing I heard with banks, we are a safety critical environment. It will never work what we are doing. Oh, we are a company with 985 a person. It's not the same with 900. It will never work. So on the one side, it was cool to see, to really remember where it comes from, like as an example, like the set-based design, for instance, it comes from hardware, and I really forgot meanwhile until I read again the lean. So yeah, that is written again. I absolutely right. And on the other side, hearing the same excuses I heard from companies that didn't want to change somehow. They didn't want to stay on the same, on the same kind of way they were. So sitting between chairs is really some kind. It's not a passion, but I'm stuck between two passions. Want to change something and honor the base.
Well, so I think that's what this episode will be about. We'll see that everything that we've experienced with the introduction of Agile in the world of software is going to happen and is happening in a very similar format whenever we're trying to do this in a company that creates large, complex physical machines. So we're going to deep dive into that. So before doing that, as we usually do, we start with your true passion, special moment, surprise, and challenge. I'm going to ask the question first to Mark.
Look, I think for me, I'm a software guy, not a hardware guy. And my true passion, anytime I get near this, is not pretending to be something I'm not and not being exposed as a fraud, but still finding a way to ask useful questions.
Nice. Thank you. How about you, Nico?
For me, what worked this week was what Mark also explained, being humble. So when I gave the training together with my co-trainers, we said we are the pros in SAFe, and we are all with a software background. Sorry, and you, the participants, are the people who have the knowledge about hardware, and it ended up being in a great symbiosis. So we teaching what SAFe is thinking and what Agile is now in our understanding. And they correcting us with, okay, in hardware, we say this way, oh, this slide doesn't make sense. And my highlight was during lunchtime, somebody said, let's go down to our factory and we show you a show table, how we design things and how we do discovery, how we do other stuff and how we are agile. And it was really cool, to co-work. So my passion is really co-work with people and not imposter. I'm something I'm not. I know exactly what I'm capable of, and where my where points are that I'm not sure of it, and just be honest and share this. And it was really a huge experience, and a huge learning moment for all sides.
Very cool. Thanks, Nico. How about you, Stefan?
Yeah, I would use the term from Adam Grant, confident humility, right? You already picked that up, Mark. I'm a software guy as well, but I've learned a lot the past few years and weeks. And the best way for me to have a deep dive is question the roots, question those principles, and then go into teaching mode, because then you have to deep dive, right? You can't sit at the side of a swimming pool and talk about swimming unless you can show it. So deep diving, I like it.
Nice. So I'm gonna ask you all a couple of questions, and you'll see that you'd have answers to them that transcend software. The thing is, I was deep diving in some numbers, actually. I've looked at the let's say manufacturing or the product development industries in Switzerland, but also in Australia, and I've got some more in Europe. And there is quite an alarming trend happening there. In 2013 or 14, there was a report published by the European Union about a huge decline in technical workforce. That is, people with core technical skills, such as mechanical engineering, building physical frames, electrical engineering, building chips, or people would call them motherboards or PCBs. People that are involved in movement of things, mechatronica. Those core technical skills are, I think, not sexy enough anymore. People that are going to university, they choose for maybe a marketing background, a marketing course, or a history course, or something else. There's way less people finishing school with a skill that is required in physical product development. And the aging population, or the population that is currently working in the manufacturing industry, is aging. As a matter of fact, there was a McKinsey report from 2023 from Lavandier and Vettel that this is focused on the US market and the European market, that about a third of all of the tech workers or workers in this industry are aged 55 or older, and there is way less influx of, let's say, the workforce with core technical skills than people that are leaving. Same with women in the same industry. The women in tech is always a tough product of how to go a tough number. In these types of industries, what was reported was 30% about 3 years ago when there was a measurement done, and it seems to be moving to 21% by the end of 2030. And it's just, there is more and more products that are being developed. The products that are being developed are more and more complex. More and more of these products become digital as well. So they become, it's an interface between software and hardware, and it requires more updates, and it needs to how do you call it, to be updated over time. So there's a lot of products out there in the market that are being used, that are installed in your home, that are installed in your car, that require update over the years, because it has like a big software element in it as well these days, not just a purely mechanical thing. However, there's a decline in technical workforce. Now, what do we do with this declining technical workforce and the increasing amount of work? We're trying to still fit it in, shove it onto the plate of the engineer. And that is just tricky. Why? Because in hardware development, and that's how we're going to jump to our first question. In hardware development, an electrical engineer might have a PhD in power voltage and power electronics. In mechanical engineer, you might have a person who understands the thermal, how do you call it, the thermal capacity of materials. It's two completely different way of thinking on about products. So it's different languages almost. So if you would have a team that with all of these different engineering disciplines together that cannot take over work from one another, they're not full stack developers, then that's a challenge. That's a struggle. So I'd like to pick your brain on this. If you have these teams that are full of these experts, how do you see collaboration in a team work out, and what should we sort of how can them working together in a small little team benefit each other? You see that I'm gonna
We're all
start
racing to be first here. Not.
Yeah, let me use an analogy, okay? You're a family. You as a father or a mother, you do have certain hobbies. What about the kids? How do they choose a hobby or a sport, right? It's by example. And you might pick the same like your parents have. You might pick something that someone else shows you, but it's always by example, right? And what you just tickled, Ali, is you have those specific domains. They look like isolated areas, but in the end, it's a product that we buy. I don't buy electronics. I don't buy software. I buy a product, right? From teams who made it real, tangible, touchable. So I would say the battle for skill sets, and you mentioned that, has started ages ago. The question is, how good are we as a company, or how good are we as a team to exemplify what we expect from people to do in a team? So, and that's part of leadership for me. Sometimes your kids choose different hobbies. All good. And if they pick a different hobby, they might use a hobby becoming a triathlete. That's an individual sport, but still you're competing with and against each others. But you train with these guys. You collaborate. You help each other. You give tips. You give hints. If you're in a team sport anyway, do Scrum in a rugby team. You're part of it. Okay, you learn to behave with your kind of isolated domain in the right way, that you create an impact. Finally, you want to score, you want to win. Therefore, you have to move, you have to do your stuff, and this goes back to what we've learned the last few decades. But again, it's thinking, what is the overall product, and how do I exemplify for others not to be in isolation, but to collaborate, no matter what is used. And one of our clients, they still have competence centers, but these guys are so close to the teams. They even sense, now I have to step in, I have to support, right? And I'm not molesting them. I'm not just stepping in and I'm the king, I'm the expert, I'm the gorilla now showing you how it goes. No, it's really, I would say, this attitude of leadership exemplifying. That's how I would answer your question.
Thank you. Is that very much different than in the software world, Nico?
In the beginning, when I read your question, I thought, I have lots of advice to give. And then when I heard how you explained it, I said, it's a little bit different. It's not the same, but it's different. It sounds like a shortage of people. You don't have enough resources. You don't have the right skills together. In software, I think it's much more easier to find a replacement, or to say, so what I did a lot of software in my software environment is when I had somebody who was really the knowledgeable people, the capacity, the expert, I just said, okay, I want to have this guy, this girl, 2.5 days in a week at my desks, at my team area. so that at these days, this person is part of the team. And if it's a bank holiday or a vacation, okay, then he misses. But if it's a normal day and I want to have him here or her, so there was my kind of way handling this shortage of people, or the critical resources, some people call them, just saying it's a fixed day and you're fixed with me. Yes, sometimes there's a fire and he has to go firefighting. Okay, but if it's the whole day firefighting, I had some serious words with the people around. So I managed to get those people at the time slot. But if now all people are critical, then I'm running out of advices, and then I would go to a coaching situation and ask the team, what can we do that you are capable to work together? Should we be something? Let's meet only once a week, and the rest of the time you're doing other projects or whatever. Then we are in a project mode, but still in a team mode. Because what I realized in my past is the teamwork is extremely in the flow. So yesterday we talked about pair programming or pairing. And somebody asked, okay, how you explain managers that pairing makes sense? And I realized in my days when I was a software developer, it made sense anyway. But on these days, what also makes sense is if you co-work together, you are together in the flow. So what I realized is today, so when I was young, there was no smartphones. But now if you do something alone, you're just interrupted every time by something vibrating and something giving you messages. And you always, back to my work. Where was I again? Back to my work. If you work as a team, as a group together, you're much more focused because I don't know how it's with you, but if you are co-working with a team, your mobile phone is off. You don't, as now, I don't look at my mobile phone. It is somewhere, and it's really, and that's the difference. So how can you make an environment where people can co-work together with the different skills? And then I would start coaching and ask, what do you think is the best idea? Because I'm running out of advices, and that's part also of our job. If I have no clue, we ask the people.
Yeah, nice. Yes, yeah, indeed. And again, that is not much different. That's relevant for both hardware teams and software teams, or sales teams, or illustrators. Is trying to find ways to collaborate and to maybe not for the entire team, but for a few individuals. Yeah. How about you, Mark?
Look, I think for me, the question is not so much have you encountered this unequivalent thing in software as how regular, right? Because you think always in software, there have been those super specialists, right? And the classic for me for a few years was a storage expert. And they were really, really important to be able to get to. And quite often there was like one of them for the company. And you had to figure out a thing because you couldn't just go, I'm going to pile you into this team. And it was like, oh, what do you do when you don't have something that fits the recipe? Because there was this recipe of a agile software team. And I think when you get into something like hardware, and, my first encounter with hardware was, how many PhDs have you got in the room? And all these discussions about T-shaped people and cross-skilling and generalized specialists just didn't feel very good. And what you've got is, if you go, well, I'm just treating something as a variation, you're in trouble because you're always going, how do I bend a recipe for a software team to work for hardware people? Instead of going, what motivates me when I think about it, right? And why did I have a team construct? I had a team construct because I was trying to create shared focus, collaboration, shared strategy, whatever, right? If maybe the team construct's the wrong answer, then how do I get that shared focus? And if you look at, the guys in team topologies did some really great work about going, what happens when we need to establish an explicit collaboration protocol for a period of time, and being quite deliberate about the construct. So I think quite often, and, if you really peel it back, you go, the recipe for software is now obsolete anyway. Because the recipe we've had for an agile software team is completely obsolete in the age of AI. And I think how you think about teamwork and collaboration constructs and just recognizing the various specializations and collaboration protocols that can be right, that's just a global problem.
Yeah. It's yesterday I had a very cool talk with some of the leaders from a train that I'm coaching. They're developing a certain very super complex module for a big machine, and one of the people over there told me a story where because I was preparing for today, and he told me a story about the difficulties or the difficulty we tell ourselves of different engineering disciplines in the same team. Because the default statement, and I'm very sure you had that yesterday as well, Nico, in your training, the default statement that typically is mentioned is, yeah, but I'm an electrical engineer. I do other things. And as a matter of fact, I have my own little project. I don't have to collaborate with the mechanical engineer. Well, so in this story, this was from experience. He was talking that he was a mechanical engineer in the past. And again, mechanical engineers, they design anything that is, that is fixed. It's typically the frame or anything that is related to fixtures, so that you could screw something in. And he had a colleague in his team who was an electrical engineer designing a sort of a PCB board that had all kind of chips on it onto a frame. Well, if you've ever opened up anything in your life, any device, you'd see that those green boards, they're typically screwed into a frame. They're screwed in, so they're small little screws. And he was talking about, during design, we thought it was fantastic, super smart to use an M2.5 screw, which is a very, very, very small screw, what we call Phillips, but like a very small little screw, to just add that board onto a frame. We thought those were just very, very, very smart. Why? Because those screws, we use them in the rest of the machine as well. So we don't have to order other types of screws. So we have the same types of screws everywhere, easy and smart. But about a half a year later, the machine was built. It had to be installed at the customer, and this was at on a factory floor. And factory floors in some industries, they have a sort of a mesh floor, so that any debris would fall through the mesh. And he was standing there trying to install that machine with double gloves, because that is a policy in these types of protective environments, with the customer standing right behind you and saying, you know what, it needs to happen right now. Why? Because the total machine or the production line is off at the moment, so it's losing me money. So it needs to be done fast and as quickly as possible, and without any mistakes. And you're standing there with double gloves, trying to unpack a screw that is like a millimeter or two. And of course, what happened? The screw falls out of your hands, because that's how you designed it. And the screw doesn't fall on the ground. No, it falls through the mesh. And in these type of factory floors, you need to get permission to go underneath that mesh, because there's sort of a whole floor underneath it, and it's a secure environment. There's power lines over there. There's high pressure water cooling lines over there. So you're not just allowed to just walk in. So it takes you even more time to fix it. The pressure that and the learning of that moment, in other words, we would call that Gemba, taught him the difficulty of integration. The integration of what the electrical engineer says was smart, because the electrical engineer created the PCB while designing behind his little laptop, and said, you know what, we're just going to create a little bit of screw holes. We're going to use small little screws in there. Simple, done. And then a mechanical engineer would create the base frame, for this, so that the thing can be screwed in. And they thought they would be perfect, only to figure out half a year later that this was actually, from a maintainability and installability point of view, was just really, really not a smart thing to do.
So they were screwed. No.
So they were screwed. Yeah. Exactly.
Dude.
So the thing is, each of the engineers had a completely different background, but they were just too much focused on their own little deliverable, and not so much on the product. What Stefan mentioned all the way at the beginning. Having the collective focus on a product that needs to be installed and maintainable by multiple people, maybe even by a person that is not in your team. So it's that resonated a little bit with me. And that's it's one of those constraints that you'd see in a hardware environment. And I'll go through one more constraint, and before we go through the jingle, which is the standard statement of, well, agile teams or safe teams, they work in a 2-week cadence, and within 2 weeks, we cannot build an entire machine. Why? Because we're hardware. We're creating complex machinery. So this agile thing doesn't work for us. So I'd like to sort of deep dive a little bit into that notion, the notion of we're unable to build an entire component or a frame or a test rig within just 2 weeks because they have a longer lead time. So what ways have you seen that allow for sort of short cycle learning while being working on long lead time deliverables? I'll start with you, Nico.
So I once had a client who said exactly the same thing. So and was in a Scrum environment. So Nico, I cannot build every 2 weeks a new main board. Are you crazy? It costs millions. And I told him, no, I'm not crazy. I didn't expect you to build it every 2 weeks. So the question was, how can we find out what is helping us to find the right design? So can we simulate some things in software? And then I told him a story from a colleague of mine who did a lot of hardware stuff. He just put a Raspberry Pi environment in front of the main board they were designing and trying to experiment with which parts has to be hardware, which parts has to be software. And that gave him some ideas what he can do. Because I'm not a hardware guy. I cannot tell him to do it this way. I'm just I remember I've told you I'm the storytelling uncle. So I just gave some story in my environment and making sure that saying I don't want to expect the same thing so little and small every time. It's okay for me if you experiment with that and say, okay, some parts are bigger, different, or simulated by software until we're sure that's the way we're going to make it before we put it on metal or in the green thing. And some of these stories resonated, and then he started understanding what I mean with every 2 weeks. We have at latest every 2 weeks, we have something to show. And by the way, the Scrum Guide said something about potential shipable increment after 2 weeks. So they always thought every 2 weeks they have to ship. So it was the old mindset still there. And it helped him to understand the idea is not building a platoon or a main board every 2 weeks. It's just having something we can show and experiment and touch and understand what is the direction we are going.
Yeah, that's actually good that you mentioned it. That statement, the potentially shippable increment, the PSI, that's a really sticky statement that has been following us everywhere. It's like the difficulty, it's really it's one of the prime reasons why people say, well, it doesn't work for us because we're building a complex environment. How about you, Mark?
So I think the first thing that really probably crossed for me as soon as I started playing with hardware people was when you're building software, shipping is like, well, I'm actually building the thing I could ship, right? In hardware, shipping is going, I'm going to release to manufacturing. So there's instantly like a really big difference going on in terms of going, are the products good enough now we can put in our customers' hands versus going, the product's good enough now to raise probably a multi-million-dollar order with my manufacturers. So there's an instant mental map that you've got to go through because it's surprising how pervasive just simple things like that can be. So if you look at ship equals release to manufacturing, I've always gone down the path of going, what's your next learning moment? And particularly, what's your next moment of learning convergence? You might need to work separately because of the nature of your PhDs, but what's the next moment when we converge multiple tracks and gain a moment of learning? And, if you stick on that and they're smart guys and back to your stories, Ali, they're classic stories, right? Anybody in this game has stories about times when something like that's happened. You can pull them out and then you just start asking, how can you learn faster, right? And of course, you can talk about digital twins and Raspberry Pis and 3D printers and blah, 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 blah. But the reality is, I think for me as software guys, and Ali, you probably get away with it because you're a hardware guy. For most of us, if we're software guys, if we start making suggestions, we're going to get in trouble because we're going to say something stupid. But if you probe on that, what's the kind of learning you want to accelerate? And you go back to, Alan Ward's book on lean product and process development. And, what was the thing he was doing? He was going, well, produce tolerance curves, and our moments of convergence are going to be converging our tolerance curves to rule out poor design options. So, okay, well, that's a reasonable interpretation.
Yeah. That's a nice one. I'm gonna respond to it in a second. But first, I wanna hear how Stefan thinks about this.
Yeah, when you initiated this question, I think you're talking about this timing mismatch, right? You have to design for something. It could be modularity, it could be interfaces, could be test points, could be even how do you learn? And when you talk to engineers, when are they happy? If they have a huge problem, they try to deconstruct that from a system or component view, and then to think about how do I get there, right? And what you mentioned and what Nico mentioned and Mark as well is they think in what can we deliver? How do we assemble the different components? And now we are shifting more towards what are learning focal points when we do that, right? And that's probably something we can trigger as a coach, that we can ask the questions, because the key activities are already there. Engineers know what they do, but the different horizons, what are we doing on a daily basis to then get this collaboration? What are we doing on a weekly or 2-week basis? How about monthly horizons, PI horizons, right? To synchronize certain stuff. So and I've learned from engineers, they came up with this. It's like a dual track I'm on, right? I'm developing, I'm constructing, I'm experimenting, but at the same time, I'm kind of forced to learn faster in shorter cycles, which I can do. Nothing prevents me from doing that. And by the way, some engineers during those courses said, it's probably not the engineering problem that we have to solve. This is innovation, it's fun, but also how do we support it by verifying and validating that this is the right stuff? Your Phillips screw, right? If we would have done that from an operational perspective at the beginning, through a simulation, through some maybe even easy prototypes where you only have a component on the workbench, where you try to screw on a tiny screw with a double glove, no way. And you would say, guys, good idea, but let's drop it. So I think it's this timing mismatch, which is something I took very seriously as a coach, and not being an engineer. This is the question I always bring in and try to bring in now in those initiatives and projects. Why do you do it at a given moment? What is your timing horizon that you're talking about? And then they are smart engineers. Then they start talking. That's what I would like to see.
Yeah. This is actually a very nice one. I've learned to be careful with the word deliverable, because in large projects where hardware is being developed, a deliverable could be a requirements document. A deliverable could be a bill of materials. A deliverable could be test documentation. But that's not the value. That's not the product itself. But if we're talking about delivery, then the focus goes to deliverable. So whenever we're talking about these short iterations, right, the short sprints, I'm leaning more towards figuring out what can be verified at the end of that sprint. So is there something that we can verify? Can we build something that is verifiable? Whether it is a design that is verifiable. So whether it is a simulatable design, so that then there is some math and let's say some more detail to it, that you could simulate and then verify the results of the simulation. it's you try to find the shortest path to your next learning. And the shortest path to our next giggle is going to be our jiggle. So this episode has just as always been enriched by the brilliant. I don't know how you sort of produce these kind of things, Nico. But brilliant jiggle from Nico, and the one for this episode is: so you're invited to a buffet, and everything is safe in this entire buffet. How does hardware complete the buffet? Nico, I'm going to start with you.
Yeah, so I see a picture of a huge buffet with many, many dishes from many, many countries, different flavors. And the hardware part is you see some things and say, oh, I know them from somewhere. And they are the original recipes somehow. And you just improve them, develop them, put some own flavors on this. But now you have the originals also on the table. If you try them, the taste may be a little bit different than you thought, but they tasted familiar. And it's a cool experience. So having similar things, but the original ones. And one thing that I imagine is, okay, let's try to recreate these dishes again ourselves. And for that, I think you will need the experts of the original ones before you try it yourselves. And then while I was thinking about it, I saw just me and my granny baking and cooking. It was always cool to have the original Greek cuisine with her, but alone it was impossible. And with her, we had together really cool sessions of doing things together and creating new stuff. So it's a cool thing on the buffet. It's the original parts of it, but you need to work together to create something new and great and influence both parts of the buffet.
Nice. The originals and some new stuff in there. Nice. How about you, Stefan?
Yeah, I'm being practical, right? Look, hardware, that's the real stuff. You get an invitation to a buffet. It looks nice on your notification on your smartphone. Nice email, lovely pictures. It's all artificial. I want to see the buffet. And honestly, try to eat from a buffet without cutlery, without dishes, without glasses. It's a mess. It's the real thing.
Some people would call that, a romantic experience where you eat with your hands.
Are we talking edge stuff? No, I'm talking daily life, right?
No, okay, you're right. Thanks, Stefan. How about you, Mark?
I had to be a little bit naughty with this, so I'm just going to go there, right? If you've traveled much in Asia, what you know is, and particularly, like, let's say Japan, if you go to breakfast or you go to a buffet in Japan, it'll be amazing, the variety and all the things that are there. But somewhere in that buffet, there'll be a little for Westerners section. And, it will have really bland white bread you can toast. It will have hard-boiled eggs next to this sumptuous buffet of other stuff. And so, for me, say for hardware, that's the Westerners section at a Japanese buffet. Yeah, you had to make sure you had someone for everybody.
Nice.
Yummy.
It ties into exactly, making it usable for everybody. Yeah. When I was listening to or reading this jiggle, I was like, Nico again with how do you come up with these things? The thing is, how does Agile for Hardware or Safe for Hardware tie into the safe ecosphere? And I thought, well, if you're imagining yourself to stand in a buffet, what do you see? Of course, a lot of food, but you also see other things. The food is placed into buckets. The buckets are placed into certain heaters. Those heaters are part of certain tables. You see cutlery, which Stefan mentioned as well. You see plates, you see tables, you see chairs, you see lights, you see plants, you see windows, you see a floor and a carpet. There's an infrastructure on which the food is placed, on which the buffet is displayed, and that infrastructure cannot be unseen if you've seen it. And I think that's how safer hardware plays into the same ecosphere, because whenever we talk about software, very often software is developed and created for a certain type of hardware, but that certain type of hardware is also designed by engineers, and that also has constraints, and it's the same constraints or similar constraints as the software engineers have been experiencing while they're developing it. So I thought that this was, my brain was exploding a little bit. And so thanks for the huge mess that I've produced over here, Nico. Exploding brains. Moving on to the last question. The last question of today, where we've seen quite some iterations of the safe for hardware material. Remember a long time ago, and also on our Miro board in the bottom right corner, I placed a couple of screenshots I think it was in 2000 and maybe it was 13 or so, 2015. SAFe came out with SAFe LSE, that stands for Safe for Lean Systems Engineering. It was an attempt to create, let's say, a flavor of the framework specifically for systems engineering.
I thought it was a drug. Okay, no.
It is LSE, Nico. LSE.
If your name is Ali or Harry, it probably was a drug, but
it was, yes. Been high on it for a long time. Then eventually, eventually SAFe 4.0 came out, and you remember the website. That was the first time where in the website you had this toggle to sort of expand the value stream layer. Remember? So you had a version there. There was at least the framework then was called SAFe 4.0 for lean software and systems engineering. So there was already material being built for hardware teams. That's also sort of in that period of time was also the time when the SAFe for Hardware toolkit was being created. So a little downloadable for sort of a half a day type of workshop. And quite recently, last year, SAFe for Hardware training has been developed and released. So if you look at this sort of progression of the training material, what did you see with respect to the adoption of the material, the rollout of the material? What kind of people were using it, or have you heard anything about it at all? And I'll ask a question to Nico.
Sorry for jumping in. So in the beginning, for me, it was just some really, really theoretical stuff. In German, you would say Kopfgeburt. It's just a birth from the head without your whole body. And they didn't really get it. Why one layer more, and what's the advantage of that? So I personally like very, very much the way it's going now, because it comes from not we explaining what SAFe is, but you are working in the hardware environment. Let us give you some inputs, what we think SAFe how we think SAFe can help you. So it's much from the other direction, like we thought about it, and that's the way to let's collaborate together. But still, I would hope for some improvements, because one feedback was not everybody is building rockets. So in Switzerland, we have many, many small companies doing hardware devices, and you can even ask yourself, are they needed to SAFe, or is something else good enough? And what those people missed were examples for smaller enterprises. Not everybody builds Teslas, SpaceX rockets, NASA rockets, or whatever. And we were lucky we were able to bring some small examples from Switzerland, but I think this is the way to go. So I like the direction from something very, very big, very theoretical, to a lot of hands-on stuff. But for Switzerland, we need it smaller.
Nice, thank you. How about you, Stefan?
You described it, Ali. It's a long ride, but at least we're riding. And I like where the ride is heading to, right? And summarizing the feedback from two courses, it's from theoretical adaptation to practical implementation. Still 3 big topics that arise. Okay, you do have a structural inertia at a given time. You have to, as we say in Switzerland, close the bag. Now that's it versus digital urgency. How fast can we change? How do we design for this adaptability? The other one is still the lagging adaptation. The learning curve is lagging beside the doing. So lots of riders, lots of rides, but what have we learned so far? And the third one, where still customers struggle, the CDP. There is a CDP, continuous delivery pipeline, but you are part of a supplier ecosystem. You are either the supplier delivering to an OEM, or you're the OEM with lots of suppliers. And this transformation is, you can call it the supply chain, whatever it is, it's really, really tough. And I'm looking forward to some good sessions with Harry, Rune, and the hardware guys. Where are we heading to with our ride?
Yeah. I think actually it's quite spot on. The safer hardware material is actually moving a little bit more from, we're going to tell you how it looks like and you'd follow, towards we're going to co-create a way of working specifically for you.
Yeah.
It's extreme. I'm exaggerating a lot, of course, but it really goes into, let's try to construct something that uses your local constraints, but then is very similar or aligned to a safe principle, rather than this is the safe principle, there are practices, just implement those practices and then refine along the way. And it's a nice insight. How about you, Mark?
So I'm going to perhaps, I don't know, what the hell? I'm going to be provocative just for a change. Because, in all honesty, I haven't ridden the safe hardware ride at all. I've been aware of it and I've had hardware clients. I haven't used any of the safe hardware stuff. But I remember when LSE happened, right?
Mm-hmm.
And it just, when you were talking about that, we're going to co-create a way of working with you. That was theoretically what happened with LSE, right? They went out and they said, hey, we've got this amazing thing called SAFE. What happens if we apply it in the cyber physical domain? What does it need to look like? And they came back with LSE. And then LSE, as you pointed out, got merged back in 4.0 and gave us large solution SAFE. And it was like the lesson of LSE was sometimes you need to deal with extra complexity and, you need another layer of orchestration sitting between your portfolios and your arts. Oh, and a few pages about built-in compliance, right? And it was like the lesson of LSE was scale. And it's pretty exciting if you look at Robin and Suzette's book and their example with the satellite mesh that runs all the way through the book. It's like, that's a really cool example. It's really cool to send a rocket into space. But, at what point was there something other than here we can deal with 1,000 engineers and 12 release trains tightly coupled and synchronized to we can think about hardware development? Because I didn't think I ever felt a lot of that in safe stuff. What I got was, and I'll forever be grateful, was I got the recommendation to go and read the Alan Ward book to back up the recommendation we'd had a year before that to read the Harley Davidson,
Machine.
Lean Machine.
The Lean Machine, right?
Yeah.
And so it was like, oh, okay, well, that gave us a prompt, but there was never stuff that goes actually explicitly here be hardware. And that's my curiosity if you look at the current course, because you guys have taught it. Now that I don't know, you probably had consulted on creating it. If you leave out the scale and compliance concerns of hardware, which are ubiquitous really, and just get into, some of the discussions we've been having today about different types of engineer and PhD, are you seeing that practical stuff come through in this safer hardware at the teams level of this is what it really means on the ground? Or are we still in that land of the traditional where it came from of the LSE and, cyber physical is all about scale?
I think the result of the training should be the output that you mean. So the result of the training will become a tailored safe framework, a tailored safe LSE specifically for the local context of the audience. So I think the activity of that was involved, that resulted into safe LSE, I think you'd be redoing it by hosting the safer hardware training. So if the training would be successful, the result would be, a tailored version of safe LSE, or how do you want to call it? Brand it your own name. But yeah, I think that's what would be the result. Yeah.
Yeah, I think, Mark, at the moment, we are really digging deeper into the topic on a safe level. What I could see, and that will be part of the discussions we'll have with Harry and Rune, is the Safe for Hardware course as an entry point has certain challenges, okay? A little bit more of specific hardware content. Then probably you need some workshops to contextualize for your customers before you then go into the Safe for Hardware teams. The Safe for Hardware teams still is too far away from what we then really need, but you need more context. You probably need a 3-step approach to get there in a more concise way over the time.
Well, from 3 steps, I would say we go to 1 step or one key takeaway. Looking at the time, we're through our hour. I'd love to talk way longer about this topic. But so just to round it off, if we just look at the topics that we discussed, the examples that have been given, the journey that the Safe for Hardware training material has been going through, what would be your takeaway, Nico?
I have to make it longer than one sentence. The last days, I really talked a lot with people, also code trainers, etc. And one thing that it's not my code, it's a stolen one from a colleague of mine, is talking more about risk reduction when you talk with hardware people. And it really resonates with me because it's what I really done when I change the language. I don't say about slicing something, slicing stories, slicing feature or whatever. The topic risk reduction helps a lot for feasibility, for even the glow story. It's also some kind of risk reduction. So change. It's not the same. So it's not hardware is the same as software. But if you change your language and focus more on the risks, it helps you. So my takeaway is change language, use risk reduction.
Nice. Thank you, Nico. How about you, Stefan?
Yeah, look, here's the invitation. Attend the party and live it at the fullest, but understand the value items.
Nice. Safe for Hardware as a rave. Nice. How about you, Mark?
I think it's be humble about what you don't know and focus on speed of learning.
Nice. I've for SPCs that I've ever thought, I'm just bored. I'm bored. I've launched multiple trains already. There's nothing exciting for me anymore out there. I want to do portfolio. I would say please reconsider. With Safe for Hardware, trying to apply it with each team, you'd have a different journey. And it makes total sense. So there's a lot of experimentation, a lot of learning happening out there. So if you're bored with launching trains, find yourself a hardware environment. And with that brings us to the end of this episode. I think in 2 weeks, that's when we're back, right?
2 weeks it is. And Nico must have had risk on his mind with his closing advice, because in 2 weeks, we're going to talk about risk management in SAFE. So I hope you've enjoyed this diversion into the world of hardware. I know Ali has. I watched Absolutely. Ali watching the clock, and he's like, it can't be over yet, but it is.
No.
So arrivederci. We'll see you in a couple of weeks.
Thank you all.
See you.